Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now, if I'm honest, it's quite early on a Saturday morning when I'm recording this and I'm half awake. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason I'm recording this early on a Saturday, and I'll come back to that in this video. But it's also actually kind of appropriate for this particular video to be half awake, half in this world, half out of it, because I want to talk to you today about Ready Player One, the 2011 novel from Ernest Cline, and of course a story that recently was brought to the silver screen in grand Spielbergian fashion. This story came to my attention not that long after publication. Certainly by 2013, people in my sphere of influence were whispering to me or downright screaming about how amazing this book was. They couldn't get enough of the premise, this virtual reality world created by a genius billionaire who leaves an Easter egg in his will for people across the globe to hunt for. How exciting was that? It was like Willy Wonka in some respect. It was deeply exciting and deeply filled with possibilities. And the more people told me, you will love this, the more I actually kind of resisted. And this is a little bit like, I think in previous videos I talked about, for example, the writings of Lovecraft, this kind of thing, where when people really tell me I will love something, I become a bit skeptical. Not least because the idea in this context sounded so incredible that I couldn't help but start immediately imagining possibilities. I'm not sure I could have described or shared with anyone the specifics of what I was imagining, but I was imagining something sprawling and epic, and yet at the same time detailed and deeply satisfying in terms of its references to pop culture and being a computer game fan. I figured this story couldn't possibly live up to what was somehow living, or at the very least beginning to grow, in my mind. But over the years there were whispers of a movie being developed, and certainly a few months ago now, with a couple of months to go before the release of Ready Player One, the movie, I had seen the trailer, and I thought to myself, I don't want to see this film having never read the book. And I already had purchased the book. The book had been on my shelves for a while, but this is where the big hurdle. The big hurdle is that I am quite dyslexic. I often have to read lots for my work. I can read, if I have to, lots and lots of text and understand it. I can trudge my way through with some certain aids. But the point is, I don't read for pleasure. I don't tend to read a book for pleasure. I tend to read graphic novels for pleasure, to relax or before I go to sleep. That's what I tend to read. And I did try. I tried to read this book, but I just couldn't get past the first couple of chapters. As exciting as they were, there was something about the font. There was also something about the fact that the author uses lots of footnotes to accurately insert an impression of what's going on. For example, in Halliday's competition announcing video that was released upon his death, Halliday being the eccentric billionaire. In this video, there's lots of descriptions that are provided separate from the text about exactly where he is, what analysis reveals about that moment in the video, so on and so forth. So it's quite a dense reading experience, and you had to do lots of sort of cross-referencing and jumping back and forth in the text and going and keeping it all in your head before you moved on with the story. And so, especially just before bed, that was not a relaxing experience, and so the book did just sort of rest on my shelves. But as I say, the countdown was on. The film was coming, and I had to do something to get this story in my head before I could possibly see any sort of film adaptation. And at this point, my amazing, superb, wonderful wife suggested that I download the audiobook. Now, there's a reason I haven't downloaded the audiobook before then, and there's a reason why I tend not to download audiobooks, and that is that I sort of see that as cheating. which I know is kind of crazy because there are people around the world who listen to audiobooks all the time. We have a very good friend actually who loves reading but also listens to audiobooks. She's a voracious consumer of written word, as it were, both through her eyes and through her ears. And I always used to think to myself, well, that's fine for her, but for me, no, it's cheating. It's cheating. I need to read. And I think this is partly the drive that got me through, and gets me through my intense work reading, is this desire to actually read the thing that I need to read. But eventually, anyway, my wife talked me around to the fact that I don't need to read this book. I can listen to it. And actually, a little bit like my experience with reading Nightfall, the novelisation of the Batman saga, where Bane eventually breaks Batman, I found reading that book much easier, having read the graphic novel. I sort of had something to hang, not the imagery, because obviously you create your own imagery when you're reading, but the story on. I had confidence in where the story was going, and so the chapter by chapter I could just read this book and I didn't feel overwhelmed by the experience. And actually, I'm finding the same goes for Ready Player One. I'm roughly halfway through the story in terms of the audiobook, and when I can't get my audiobook fix, then I turn to the written word. And because it's already living in my mind, I'm not having to do so much hard work to actually read it. So actually, it's not cheating at all. It is actually a tool that helps me just to digest the contents of the story. And so, that's what I did. So I'm about halfway through the book, as I say, and in that sense, this isn't a review. Rather, this is just me sharing what I'm loving about this story and why I am so far enjoying it. I haven't seen the film, and in fact, I'm unlikely to bother watching the film, knowing what I know now about the story compared to, for example, the trailer and also some reviews of the movie. I may not bother, and I'll come back to that in just a bit. But I think the main thing, first of all, that I'm really enjoyed about this story is the concept. I think it's a very well executed concept. This global obsession with an Easter egg hunt inside a computer game that was already a global addiction is not only eerily realistic, in so much as we all kind of have a global technological distracting addiction anyway, in the shape of our smartphones, and it wouldn't take that much to push everyone into a virtual world. This is achieved in the story by a slightly dystopian setting that is in itself not only useful for the story as a motivator for people wanting to escape the real world, but also it's thematically perfect. It reminds you of Mad Max and other 80s and 90s movie tropes in particular that the author is, of course, referencing in this geek fest of a novel. So it works on multiple levels, and I particularly appreciate the way that there hasn't been an astonishing catastrophe. It's just been a slow decline in human civilization. Resources are scarce, nations are fighting over what's left, and the human population has come to such a density that people are having to live in very strange conditions. Our hero actually lives in the stacks, a series of caravans stacked one upon the next, with sort of girders holding the whole structure together. A piecemeal tower block, I suppose. Very evocative imagery and a very believable setting. I really appreciate that, and in that sense, I appreciate how the author carefully constructs and encourages you, invites you into this world that he has invented. Apparently, Ernest Cline took about a decade to write the story, and you can see that in the logic and also how actually you are introduced to different aspects of the world. You're not told everything in one go. You're told, as with good writing, you're told what you need to know. You're shown the rest, and every now and then the characters' interactions with the world will reveal more about the world. It's a well written and enticing vision of a I don't know, tech noir. Well, again, there's a Terminator reference there. Sort of a future that 80s action movies would appreciate. As I say, it wouldn't take much, I think, to push people in our world from social media and their smartphones into a virtual reality escape, a conglomerate of a computer game and a social media network and a shopping network and an entertainment zone and a place where you can be what you want to be and do anything you want to do. That's a very enticing prospect in our world, never mind in a world where everything is going to shit. And actually, in that sense, there's also a pleasing relationship with our world and the story in terms of technology. The technology feels like it's near future. There's talk of, for example, virtual reality headsets. There's talk of haptic feedback gloves and body suits that allow you to feel what's going on in the simulated environment, and all that stuff is very much in the works at the moment, especially haptic touch and being able to interact with virtual objects with using gloves, for example. That's something that is actually a real technology already. So again, well thought out, especially considering it was written in 2011. This guy was doing the research, and in fact, actually, people who work on virtual reality projects are often given, especially for example at the Oculus Rift company, given this book as like research material to think about how they're going to implement virtual interaction and interactivity into their projects. So Ernie clearly did his research when he was writing this novel. I also appreciate the authentically teenage voice of the protagonist in this story. Wade Wilson, growing up with an alliterative name because his father was a fan of Peter Parker and Clark Kent and thought it would be really cool to have a superhero type name, is a believable teenager. His obsessions, his need to prove himself, his knowledge in situations like his need to insult people, his distractions, when he becomes obsessed with certain things or maybe has a crush. These are all very relatable to me. I was once a teenage boy myself, and so yes, there's something authentic going on there. But I really do hope that this doesn't reflect the author's mind now and his mindset, in so much as Oscar Wilde once said, our first novel, if you write a novel, is always about ourselves. And I really hope that Ernest Cline has grown out of some of these juvenile tendencies. In particular, Wade Wilson has moments when he is supremely smug about aspects of the world that just becomes a bit grating. So there's one 2-page, 3-page section where he just rants, frankly, about how religion is bullshit. And I just found myself going, yeah, I get the point. Can we move on, please? Can we you don't have to convince me. I get it. Can we move on? That is very teenage, though. So in some respects, it's very true to the character. Of course, teenagers like to, share things that they've just found out as though no one else knew it before they knew it. So maybe it is just the character, but I really hope it's not the author. It would be a real shame if Ernie was that irritating in real life. but in that sense, the writing is good. I feel as though Wade exists separate from myself, and he's an understandable, believable teenage future boy. Now, with that said, I'm given reason to presume that the author is in fact more sophisticated than Wade Wilson, in so much as the structure of the book is a very elegant way to encourage people to start looking into the obsessions of the author, just as in the story. Halliday sets up this competition that really, because of his own personal inclinations and possibly being on the Asperger's sort of autistic spectrum, his expectation that people will share his particular passions and interests. He sets up this competition in order to encourage the whole world to become a fan of the things he was a fan of. Halliday wants people to learn the 80s inside out. The clothing, the music, the pop culture, the movies, the TV shows, the computer games, of course. And that mechanic works beautifully. In the story, the world becomes obsessed with the 80s, and in particular, egg hunters or gunters absolutely have an encyclopedic knowledge of the 1980s. And in the same way, the author is using this story to encourage you to learn more about what the author finds interesting. In particular, at the beginning, we hear Halliday explaining the first Easter egg ever hidden in an Atari computer game, in the game Adventure, I do believe. And it's clear that the author, in fact, is sharing with you this little tidbit of knowledge because he appreciates it and wants you to hold it with similar reverence as well. So I really appreciate that mechanic. It's a nice echoing, and it's a nice way of I suppose actually subtly reinforcing the feeling and the empathy that you have for the protagonist as he goes through his adventure, because you are also becoming more and more interested in the things that the author and indeed Halliday have an interest in. So it's nice. It kind of, so I mean, it sort of reinforces the experience because you are in that sense Wade, and you are going through someone else's passions with them. Now, at times this manifests basically as a series of lists. You are told that the TV shows and the movies that Halliday likes, and one suspects that Cline himself enjoys. You're exposed to just names of TV shows, Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, Mork and Mindy. I know, is Mork and Mindy in the book yet? I'm not sure, but yeah, that kind of thing, without really having descriptions, and that can be a little bit annoying at times. At times, if I'm honest, it feels a little bit like parts of the Bible that you hear in The Simpsons. And Abraham begat Shalom, and Shalom it becomes a bit of a list at times. But when the book is working at its best, you're actually going through the experience of nerding out and geeking out at the prospect of playing a computer game or being party to a new and exciting experience. In particular, for example, reliving the Matthew Broderick movie War Games, and having to go through that opening scene, and as Wade is having to play out the role, remembering the lines and basically being tested on his knowledge of the movie in a virtual setting. He is Matthew Broderick to all intents and purposes. You are going through that experience as well. So at times this exposure to 80s pop culture in particular is a bit of a strain because of the lists, but when it works at its best, it is very engaging, and it does, as I say, bring you in with the author's passions. This brings me to the release of the movie and the inevitable comparisons between what I've read of the book and the trailers that I've seen for the film. And with that in mind, I'm pretty sure I won't be seeing the film anytime soon. I didn't see it in the cinema, and it is now out on DVD and Blu-ray, but I probably won't be buying it for a while. And this is because they've made certain changes that I'm probably going to struggle to let go of. Now, I've lived with people for years, for example, who've read all the Harry Potter books, and with the movies, they say the movies are great, but the books are so much better. And I find myself just going, yeah, whatever, I love those movies. I've read 2/3 of the Harry Potter books, and I can live with the changes that they make for the sake of expediency, especially, for example, in The Order of the Phoenix. I think the movie is better than the book. But in this case, they make changes that really alter the things that so far I'm really appreciating about the novel. I suppose a small thing would be Wade Wilson as a relatable human being. He's a bit overweight, he's got spots on his face, he's very much a teenager in that sense, and he's a teenager who spends all his time in a virtual simulation of multiple worlds where he doesn't have to move or do anything. So of course he's not going to be a specimen, as it were, of a human being. But the Hollywood movie cannot live with that, and so Wade in the film is actually quite healthy, quite attractive, and that's a bit annoying, but that's okay. I suppose a positive is that they've clearly taken scenes from the story and rendered them beautifully in the film. There's a scene, for example, in a dance club where you're able to float around and dance to the rhythm of the music in very creative and undulating ways, almost like you're floating in zero G. That's wonderful to see that in the trailer. But the real annoyance for me is that it's clear that they've taken the structure of the quest, where in the story, in the book, that is, you have to get 3 keys to open 3 gates, and each one of those things comes with a challenge in order to get to the Easter egg, a real quest, that's going on for the Easter egg. And they've watered it down to 3 key hurdles in the film. That's understandable. A 3-act movie, okay, fine, I get that. But it's the specific change that they've made to the getting of the copper key. And the first key in the story, in the novel, is achieved by Wade's knowledge of Halliday, by deciphering a limerick, a riddle, and then by going through essentially a D&D module, a little D&D dungeon to get to the object of the quest. It echoes. The author and Halliday are encouraging you to go through their passions to get to the thing, to go through this story, to get to the key. And at the end of this little D&D module, you have a Lich King sat on a throne who challenges our hero to play a game of joust on an arcade machine. And that's really cool. And the imagery and the way I was imagining it, it wouldn't have made a bad film. It could have actually been very Temple of Doom-ish, in how it was shown in the cinema. But instead, in the trailers, the copper key is clearly the goal of a road race. It's clearly the prize at the end of a race. And this has been confirmed in some of the reviews that I've read, where it's cool and it's one of the best things in the trailer. I really loved seeing it. You see the DeLorean, the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, King Kong turns up, the bike from Akira, all these excellent references. But the thing is, and this is something that seems to have been lost in the marketing as well of Ready Player One the movie, is that the book is more than just a series of references. There's lots of videos on YouTube where people are talking about how many Easter eggs there are in Ready Player One, and that's cool in its own right, but that's not the point of the book. The book isn't just a series of look at this thing, look at this thing, look at this thing. The book is about the passion that those things engender in you, or in the author, or in Halliday himself in the story. And I felt that passion with the D&D module, with the fact that young Halliday loved this experience and wanted to share it with whoever went on the quest. An exciting, visually spectacular, but ultimately fairly boring A to B road race just doesn't do that justice. And so I find myself aware and therefore wary of watching the film. And so I probably won't watch the film, because I'm really enjoying what this book is, and I'm enjoying how it's speaking to me, and I'm also enjoying the world that it's painting for me. I don't want that to be tarnished by a Hollywoodization, by a gloss put on it by 2018 movie standards. And finally, I did actually say I would explain why I'm recording on a Saturday morning. And this is actually one of the reasons I felt compelled to talk to you about Ready Player One today, is that tomorrow I'm going to be driving from the northeast of England down to Kent for work purposes. I'm doing something in Kent on Monday morning, and then coming back on Monday, and that's 6 hours each way with breaks. Of a drive. It's quite a hefty drive, and I'm actually looking forward to it because of this audiobook and because of Ready Player One. Now you could say that's just an audiobook though, that's not really Ready Player One per se, but at the moment it is for me, and I can't wait for that journey, those miles, that long, arduous experience to be somewhat mitigated, if not swallowed up entirely, by Wade Wilson's hunt for Halliday's Easter egg. So yeah, this experience, this audiobook is something that I'm about to have a huge binge of, and I simply had to talk about it this morning. The audiobook, incidentally, is read by Will Wheaton, Wesley Crusher from Star Trek Next Generation, and he does a fairly good job. I've heard some people complain that his voice is a bit distracting, and it is kind of pleasing hearing him say Star Trek every now and then. But it's for the most part pretty good. There are a couple of things that have annoyed me though. One of them is there's a whole chapter where the narrative is told through a messenger conversation between Parzival, who is Wade Wilson's in-game avatar name, and Artemis, another avatar who he meets. And these two are having a conversation. He goes, Parzival, hello, how are you? Artemis, I'm not too bad. How are you? Parzival, I'm doing pretty well. Have you found anything out yet? Artemis, no, I'm doing but and all the way through that chapter, Will is saying Parzival, Artemis, Parzival, Artemis, Parzival, and it actually sounds like what they do is they almost like they sample him saying Parzival once, and they just keep on repeating it in the audio track. It's kind of odd. I don't think you have to read that every single username iteration when you're reading the book. You can just start reading the conversation. After all, you don't have to do that with speech normally in a novel. So that's a bit odd. And there was a there was a point a few days ago when I had to put this thing down. Actually, I haven't picked it up since. It's been about 4 days because Will Wheaton slightly pissed me off when he pronounced Glenmorangie whiskey, Glenmorangie. What? It's Glenmorangie, and it's even worse because it's put in the context of Wade saying Glenmorangie, Connor McLeod's favourite drink from Highlander, and I'm like, oh god, Glenmorangie, not Glenmorangie. So, it would have been nice if someone could have picked him up on some of his pronunciation. He also doesn't know how to say the word Minotaur either. But those are little things, and I'm going to get over it for this experience of driving down to Kent over the weekend tomorrow. So there you go, Ready Player One. I have been loving it, and in particular I've been loving the audiobook, and therefore I may never ever watch the movie. But I simply had to talk about it with you today. As ever guys, until next time, do take care.